welcome to our Lifting the Lid on Subject Specialists webinar. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm just going to make sure that everybody is in from the waiting room, and I think we have everybody with us. I will keep an eye on what is going on with our session. So welcome, my name is Fran Stovold and I'll be chairing the session for us today. We've got a packed 2 hours and a fantastic panel joining us today. I thought I'd start with a little bit of housekeeping. We're running in Zoom webinar format, so if you have any questions as we're going through the session, please add them into our chat, and my colleague Jo Boardman, who's with us today, will help us answer those, and I will feed them back out to our panel. If anybody has any technical difficulties with the session today, please just log back in using the details that you had through the email, and I will keep an eye on the wait room and let you back in again. If we have any technical difficulties and our session goes down at my end, I will get in contact with everybody as soon as possible to let you know whether we can get up and running back within our time frame or whether we will need to reschedule. We are recording the session today, and the recording of the session will go up and be circulated afterwards. And we think it will probably go up on our Sporting Heritage YouTube channel and then link out to the SSN Consortium website and out through all the networks. So I think that's all the technical details before we start. I thought before we launch into our panel discussion, start with just giving a bit of background to what an SSN is. As the title of the session says, we want to sort of lift the lid on what SSNs do as individual organisations, but also what we do together as a group, as a consortium. So in its simplest form, SSNs are networks of people and organisations who come together to share and support specialist knowledge, to undertake advocacy and the sharing and development of skills and research around themed collection and topic areas. We're a growing range of organisations. In some ways, we're a bit of an unsung support network. There are many, as you know, across the heritage sector, many support agencies out there, and SSNs sometimes get a little bit forgotten along the way, and that's one of the reasons why we're looking to raise the profile, particularly through this webinar today. And we also have a podcast that's coming out as well, of which we'll be able to share the details with you very soon. As we know, over the last 10 years, there's been much discussion around the erosion of specialist knowledge, particularly relating to collections. The time when you could be a curator or a collection specialist specialising in one area is very much becoming a thing of the past. As we all know, our roles and responsibilities now are quite broad and overarching, and you're expected to bring in lots of different aspects into your jobs. However, it is still recognised that specialist knowledge is vital to the preservation and interpretation of collections across the UK, and particularly if we want to ensure that they're going to remain relevant and accessible to our audiences. So this is where subject specialist networks can step in and bridge that gap for us. The role of SSNs is recognised by many of our key stakeholders and funders as playing this really important role to keep this specialist knowledge alive and being a repository for that, for those of you who aren't specialists within your subject areas. We're very aware that, going back to this idea that people have broad and overarching roles, that you may inherit a collection which has items in it that are not within your specialism. So subject specialist networks are there not only for those who are the specialists within those sections, but also to support those of you who aren't. And I know we will probably talk a little bit about that specialist versus non-specialist idea a little bit later in the session. We have more than 50 subject specialist networks covering the whole of the UK at the moment. They are broad in their range of topics that they cover and the way that they're set up, and some of that we will explore today. There is no one size fits all from a subject specialist network, if there's one thing you can take away from today's session. Our topics cover broad areas ranging from archaeology, natural sciences, art, to things that are much more specific. So there are specialist networks for video games, for workhouses, for people who work with leather or medieval pottery. So there's a whole range. So if you're looking for support within a collection area, looking at the SSN Consortium website, and I'll put the link in the chat, And seeing if there is a network out there that can help you is a great starting point. The networks deliver a range of activities, whether it's conferences, journals, training, mentoring, simple inquiries, signposting. Everybody does it slightly differently. Everybody offers a range of different support for their members and also for non-members, also reporting up to larger bodies, whether that's funders or within the political sphere. And we will look at some of that today. So that's an overview of what the individual SSNs do. Obviously, we all face similar challenges and have similar needs to operate in a strategic way. So the SSNs are all invited to come together in the consortium. And it's the consortium that's bringing you this webinar today with the generous support of Art Fund. So the SSN consortium brings together all the SSNs or those who would like to be involved so that we can discuss those needs and challenges and look at a way forward so that we can offer the best support coming back out to yourselves. So I think that's enough background context. What I would like to do is start to introduce our panel. And I'd like to come to you first, Gail.
Hello, my name is Gail Boyle. I am here today to represent the Society for Museum Archaeology.
Erin, would you like to go next?
Thank you. I'm Erin Lee, and I am a co-chair of APAC, which is the Association for Performing Arts Collections. And I'll pass over to Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Pearce. I manage the War and Conflict Subject Specialist Network at Imperial War Museums. Paolo?
Hi, I'm Paolo Viscardi. I used to be the chair of the Natural Sciences Collections Association, and that's how I got involved with the consortium. I'm no longer on the committee for the Natural Sciences Collections Association, or NATSCA, but I am still involved with the consortium and representing the consortium and NATSCA, acting as a go-between there.
And last but by no means least, Justine.
It's me. Hello everyone. Yeah, I'm Justine Riley. I'm the Director of Sporting Heritage, which is the SSN for sports collections across the UK, and also a new fledgling network working with neurodivergent collections, which you may have come across.
Lovely, thank you. So now we've done our brief introductions, I'd like to go back round and if each of you would like to say a little bit more about what your networks do. So Gail, can I come back to you to share your presentation?
There we go. You should be able to see a very nice screen of an object on the right hand side and a little bit about us. So the Society for Museum Archaeology is one of the older, more traditional styles of subject specialist networks. Obviously you're going to get a view of the different types this morning, but we're a volunteer-led membership organisation, and we're the Arts Council England recognised SSN for British Archaeology in the UK. And that is also a distinction that I suspect we'll be talking about this morning, because not all SSNs are recognised by Arts Council, but as far as the consortium is concerned, we're self-identifying as subject specialist networks. We've got 200 plus members, and those can be individuals who are archaeologists themselves, or they can have an interest in museum archaeology or be employed in some other way to do with the museum. And I think it's important to say that we're UK-wide, and we do have membership beyond the UK as well. We're fully constituted, so we have a constitution that we're organised by, and we've had a constitution for over 40 years. And I think one of the most important things about our society is that we're outward looking in that we work collaboratively with a wide variety of other organisations that are not necessarily museum or collections based organisations. And when we first started out, it was all to do with the fact that there were changes taking place, particularly within the archaeological world, and there was a need for people that were working, particularly within museums with archaeological collections, to have a political voice in order that they were heard alongside all the other archaeologists. This is at a time before developer funding had started to really take to the fore. But new societies, new groups were being formed, and museum archaeologists came together. And in that respect, it started off with a need for a political voice, but then morphed into an organisation which actually supports the care of collections, the management, the understanding, the sharing of the facilitation of access to and best practice in that respect. I thought I'd give you a flavour of all the different kinds of organisations that we might communicate with. There are some that that we work with more than others. This is not an exhaustive list, but particularly we are very heavily associated with Historic England, but also the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, which represents should represent all professional archaeologists across the archaeological world. But all of those organisations there represent different aspects of the delivery of archaeology across the UK and beyond. And I think that is one of our strengths, in that we do look beyond the museum world. And that's really important also for the society, because actually, although we are funded through subscription, we'll talk about that in a little while, we do a lot of work which is funded by third parties beyond the normal Arts Council Art Fund role, and in particular Historic England. So we have had Arts Council funding. I worked out that some of the projects that I'm about to show you now, that over the last 5 years we've managed to achieve something like £165,000 worth of external funding to deliver the kind of work we do beyond our membership. And that includes doing this kind of thing. So I said before that we started off as an organisation that needed a political voice and morphed into an organisation about best practice and delivery and support. But at the same time, we were aware that, as Fran said at the beginning, that there is a loss of expertise, that we needed really to be able to articulate that. And in order to do that, we needed data. So we have done quite a lot of survey work about the state of museum archaeology and archaeology generally in the UK. And we've also responded to a variety of different reports that have been commissioned by the government in terms of this, and also responding to things like the Mendoza Review of Museums. So these are all to do with what the state of expertise is, and also space for archaeological archives in particular. During all of that process, we managed to gather data that enabled us then to target what we were doing in particular ways. So we approached Arts Council for a Resilience Fund bid that supported the SMART project, which was the Society for Museum Archaeology Resources and Training project, which had 3 outcomes, one of which was rewriting the standards and guidance in the care of collections, and also materials fact sheets, which were all freely available. But we also did workshops for people in person, designed to meet the needs of people who weren't necessarily museum archaeologists looking after museum archaeological collections, and then also a pilot mentoring project too. So we were trying to look at different aspects of support that we could actually give. So there we are, we had 4 workshops. So these were regional. So we're starting to look at how we support people within the regions rather than just nationally. And we want to express what the breadth of the work is that people do with archaeological collections. So this is a series of case studies that we commissioned towards the beginning of lockdown to use up some of the money that we got left over from a project. So we are publishing and we're making information available. We have a website in order to be able to do that. And we also publish using a third-party website that provides access to recorded sessions that we've done too. And then just to bring you up to date, because we know a lot about what's happening with our expertise, this is our next biggest project, which is to do a real-time survey of just exactly how museum archaeological collections are being used. And it'll take us between 18 months and 2 years to do this. And we're working with approximately 20 organisations who have volunteered their time to provide us with data on a weekly basis about who accesses the collections, and then we'll publish and work from there. And this is not something that we're doing on our own. We're doing this because it fits into a wide variety of other programmes and agendas. And in this particular case, it's to do with Historic England's Future of Archaeological Archives project, and understanding and advocating on behalf of our subject. So that's a very brief run through of what we are, what we've been doing, where we get our money from, and what we're up to next.
Lovely, thanks very much, Gail. And I should say that while we're all introducing ourselves, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat so we know who is out there and listening on the other side. So thank you, Gail. Erin, can I come to you next? Can you talk to us about performing arts?
Absolutely, thank you. There we are, hopefully you can see that. Yeah, fantastic. So I'm going to introduce the Association of Performing Arts Collections. So we are a membership organisation for professionals, specialists and other individuals working with or interested in performing arts heritage in the UK and Ireland. So that includes archivists, curators, librarians, students who might be studying, so whether they might be undertaking masters programmes in particular theatre and performance areas, or archive students or curator students, and also individuals who might have inherited collections, as Fran sort of mentioned earlier, and sort of don't have any formal training in particular collections management. So it is quite a broad variety of individuals that are part of our network. And some facts and figures, we were founded in 1979, so we celebrated our 40th anniversary just before COVID, and we became the SSN for Performing Arts in 2005. And we went through the very laborious, which I'm sure we might talk about, application to become a charity in 2018. Our reach is, as I said, the UK and Ireland, but I should note that we're also a very close contact with the international version of APAC, which is called SIBMAS. So the international version, which looks after theatre collections all around the world, is called SIBMAS. So when members join APAC, they're given the option of whether they want UK and Ireland membership of APAC, or whether they also want to join the international version, which is SIBMAS. And then we manage that membership process for them and pay the membership fees to SIBMAS. In terms of our membership, we have 82 members currently, 58 are institutions. So that could be theatres like the National Theatre, which is where I work, or places like the Royal Opera House or the Royal Albert Hall, but it may also be universities which hold collections, so the University of Bristol Theatre Collection, or it could be third parties such as the V&A, which has a large theatre and performance collection. Then we have 16 individuals and we have 8 students. And we have an operating budget of around £1,500 per year. And we're headed up by a board, which is made up of these roles, pretty standard: co-chairs, secretary, treasurer, membership secretary, and website officer. We have recently added an academic and student rep, and that's because our student membership is relatively new, and we wanted to make sure that those students were being served very much at board level, making sure that they're getting something out of their membership. And that's been really productive. We're starting to have research cafes with our students and finding ways to include them in a lot of our events, so that they can get experience of chairing panels or presenting or planning and hosting symposia and study days, which has been really well received. And we also have officers without portfolio, which is definitely the easiest post to recruit to on a board. There's always people willing to do the without portfolio positions, and they're very much sort of floating positions across the board, and they help in various projects that we might be doing as we go through the year. In terms of membership contact, we have 4 member meetings per year, and we always try and make sure that that's more than just a meeting. So pre-COVID and starting again soon, they would usually have been in person, and we would have had a visit or a tour. So we would have had a tour around a collection or talks from people who work within that organisation. During COVID, we have obviously gone online, and we've provided 3 or 4 talks from different organisations at each of those member meetings. And then we have an annual student showcase, which is a really fantastic opportunity for those student members to share their research with the archivists, curators, librarians who are helping them on a daily basis to do that research. So it's a really good moment of sort of collaboration and really explaining what happens on the other side of the research desk. So it's really rewarding for archivists and librarians to hear about that research. We also run a study day and a symposium per year. They tend to be a full day, and we also try and hold those outside of London. So we tend to have that in one of our regional members. We run an email discussion forum, which is hosted on Jiskmail, and we also have a member support email address. We have a strong social media presence, and we might talk about this later. We find Facebook not to be particularly helpful, but we find Twitter to be the best place, and we also can advocate for all of our members much better on Twitter, so that's been successful for us. And then in terms of membership benefits, we have a newly designed website, which is very exciting. So that's live. And we also have online resources and a blog that are hosted on there. Those online resources could be write-ups of study days, they could be case studies, they could be best practice guidance, and they're all available for free on that website. We have a busy digital preservation working group. Within performing arts, you find that you have very small collections with massive AV material. So it's a sort of weird in-between area where you might have volumes of content similar to the BBC or the Wellcome collection, but you have the staffing of, I don't know, one person. So it's a sort of niche area, and we're currently writing best practice guidance for the whole archive sector on digital preservation and publishing that for free on the website. We provide travel grants for APAC and non-APAC events for our members. And we also have lots of networking opportunities. So pre-COVID, we ran culture swaps, which are where you spend a day shadowing another member in their organisation, and then you swap. And that was really successful, just to share expertise, best practice, get a sense of what happens in other organisations similar to your own. And we also ran coffee roulettes the whole way through COVID, and we will continue to do that, which is where we pair people up randomly just to have a coffee on Zoom with each other, chat through their experiences. So successful, we rolled it out to all of our American colleagues, and then we rolled it out to the whole of SIBMAS. So we had international coffee roulettes around the world talking about theatre and performance, which was really exciting and built up that international network. And as I mentioned, we have that relationship with SIBMAS, our international equivalent. So that's everything that we do. I've popped our website and Twitter handle there down the bottom, and our email contact if you've got any questions, but really looking forward to talking more into how APAC is run. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks, Erin. That was great to hear about APAC. So next on our list, Charlotte, would you like to talk to us about war and conflict?
Yep. I'll just share my screen. Okay. So yes, so I'm Charlotte. I'm the partnerships manager at Imperial War Museums. I want to just talk to you briefly about the War and Conflict SSN. So as partnerships manager, part of my role is to manage the SSN, which I'm going to talk to you about. But as I'm sure like lots of people kind of have different hats on, part of my role is also managing the 1418 Now Legacy Fund. So this is an art commissions programme. And there are overlaps in that members of our network can apply for funding for the art commissions. But what I want to focus on really is obviously the SSN itself. So we are quite new in comparison to the ones we've heard about so far. So we were launched in July of 2019, and we're free to join, and it's a network of anybody who looks at stories relating to conflict from the First World War right the way through to the present day. We've got more than 800 members around the world, most of whom are in the UK, but also overseas. And it ranges from people such as the museum sector to archivists to academics, creative practitioners, basically anybody that works on sort of not-for-profit activity and specifically want to share stories relating to the human impact of conflict. So in terms of what we offer our members, so a key thing that we want to do is to promote what other people are doing, what our members are doing, how we can collaborate together. So these are just a few images relating to that. So in the top left, we have an e-newsletter that goes out every month, and people can share activities that they've got coming up or things they want to share, like website links, anything like that, as well as us promoting our own activities. We have a Twitter following, which is really fantastic, really growing all the time. So, you know, as we've just heard, it's a really good way of both keeping in touch with existing members, but also reaching out to potential new members. Bottom left, we have a blog on the IWM website with a partnership section. So this is where our members can write a piece of around 1,000 words with some images. Again, it's just a lovely way to share their research. And then bottom right, we have an online directory so that people can search who else is in our network, because we are quite large. So there are case studies on there, but also a facility where you can search for somebody who's interested in a particular subject, or works for a particular organisation, for example, and we can put you in touch. We also offer a programme of free events and online resources. These are both historically focused, so looking at the subject matter, but also practical guidance that is helpful across different sectors. So just a couple of examples there. So on the left-hand side, this is a recent resource pack that we put together to mark the 40th anniversary of the Falklands conflict. And basically it's a package of IWM photographs, film and sound clips that are free for our members to use in their activities. So it's a really great resource. We also have lots of guidance documents. Members can also pass on some of their resources, and these are all available exclusively to members. And then on the right is just a quick screenshot of one of our events. We run them regularly throughout the year. And again, some of them are historically based, but some of them are more thinking about the practical issues. And so this is just an example of one that we did about building income, thinking about crowdfunding, things like that. And before COVID, we did run these events in person, but of course we had to switch to digital. But we did actually find that our audience increased as a result, because we do have members around the world, so they were able to tune in, and we record them and share them so that people can watch them back as well. So that's kind of a very brief whistle-stop tour of our SSN. I look forward to telling you a bit more as we have the discussion coming up. To find out more, if you just go to the web address just there, and you're very welcome to email as well if you have any questions after today. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. Right, to our penultimate introduction, Justine, do you want to tell us about Sporting Heritage?
Okay, thank you, thanks, Fran. Okay, so I'm Justine Riley, and I'm the Director of Sporting Heritage, and we are a community interest company, and we exist to support the sporting heritage sector. I'll try not to talk too much about the specifics of a CIC and how we're set up, because I think we're covering that in a little while. So our mission is very much about supporting the protection, collection, preservation and access of sporting collections and sporting heritage, and we work across the UK. And we work to demonstrate why these collections are important, why they should be supported, and how they link across lots of different agendas. So they are things like sports participation, community engagement, health and wellbeing, as well as heritage and cultural access. And as a result, we have lots of different partners and lots of different members from various different sectors. So that includes sports clubs and governing bodies, museums, archives, community groups, schools, you name it. There's somebody who's either got a collection or is interested in working with a sporting collection, and that's growing. And similarly, to what you were saying, Charlotte, that's growing more internationally, particularly as COVID has happened and more of our work's been accessible online. So the relevance of sporting heritage, so why do we exist, and what is it all about? So it's often embedded within communities, and it uncovers ignored and hidden histories, and that's a lot of what we focus on. How do we ensure that the heritage that our network is looking at and developing is very representative of the communities that they work with, and it often attracts non-heritage traditional audiences. So there's lots of opportunities for the sector to be understanding how they can work with sporting collections and develop what they do to change the audience that they have. And it's not only the theme of sport that we look at, but we talk about where does sport fit within those wider objectives. So there's social, political, economic changes. So things like women's rights, things like racism are absolutely crucial and central to the development of sport and sports heritage. So they hit across our members and sectors' interest. And then again, linking to that, agendas and where we hit across health and wellbeing education. So we do lots of things like resources for education, and how we ensure that the collections that we're looking after are really relevant and interpreted with and for different communities and audiences. So what we do, we're a community interest company, so we're a not-for-profit, we're a small organisation. We were set up when we recognised that there was a gap. There was not support for sporting collections across the UK that existed, not just within large sporting museums. So they could be within an archive service, a local authority museum, or they could be held by a private collector or by a sports club, governing body, school. And there wasn't support, but there was a real need and wish to look after these collections and to better understand how to do that. So we do our activity through a range of different programmes. So we have wide-scaled focused projects, which could be anything like our Sport England funded programme that looked at women's and disability sport, to ensure we were focusing specifically on those areas of collections that we knew were not being looked at and were not being properly understood. We have a collections database, which is pulling together all the different collections of sport that exist, so that people can go and access it and share. We do lots of digital provision. We have a fantastic toolkit, which is for sporting collections, but anyone is able to access it, and it's very relevant across lots of sporting collections, developed by the lovely Fran. So it's a brilliant resource that we know our sector are properly accessing and using. We have dedicated networks, so they are networks that are geographical in scope. We know the more localised that we deliver our activity, the better, but they're also in terms of subject area. So for example, we have a network that covers Wales, but we also have a network that covers national collections. And we were delivering those in person until COVID hit, and then we've been delivering those largely online since. We have a workforce development training programme, and that covers everything from fundraising to how to specifically look after and develop a collection. Similarly to lots of SSNs, we have so many different people that we are working with and supporting. We try and make sure we're targeting lots of different members' needs. And we have a 2-day conference that we deliver every year. Again, that was delivered in person until COVID, and then that's been being delivered online digitally since. We also deliver consultancy when we need to, if organisations approach us and they want additional support, and we have a membership programme to support the sector. And that's our website. Feel free to go on and have a look at some of the things that we do. We raise awareness as well. Often sport had been kind of overlooked, I think, in terms of a cultural heritage subject matter, and so a lot of our work has been trying to ensure that it is raised up and seen as important as other collections areas, which for us it feels like that's obvious because sport is so crucial and central to communities, but it hasn't always traditionally been seen that way. So as a result, we developed things like National Sport and Heritage Day, which is a nationwide campaign getting people to think about their local collections and developing them, and that's becoming more international in its focus. We've recently developed the Sporting Heritage Awards, so they're an annual programme that is celebrating some of this diverse and different kind of heritage and collections that happen. We run other kind of core programmes as well. We have our Heritage Ambassadors, which has helped us link across to sport, I think, because heritage was kind of going, oh, it's all about sport, and sport was saying it's all about heritage, but that's kind of helped us to be able to access different parts of the sector to really focus on the collections and help the networks work more closely together. Yeah, we have a focus on ignored heritage, and we have quite strong social media feeds as well. We've the same, I can't remember who was saying it, but Facebook, yeah, it doesn't really work for us either. Twitter and Insta much more useful. We do a lot of advocacy and policy work, like Gail was saying, lots of work with the policymakers and funders like Arts Council, National Lottery, Wales, government, lots of different organisations to ensure that sporting heritage is seen as important within their delivery. We obviously work with the SSN Consortium. We see it as hugely valuable to our work, because a lot of our network has collections that fit your networks. So how do we ensure that we're linking them back across to you as well? So for example, if they wanted to learn more about how to look after their photography collections, the photography network's going to be more suitable in that specific area, so we can make that happen for them. And then we run various different research programs, leveling from PhDs to volunteer programs. So that's a really quick whistle stop of what we do and why we do it. Yeah, there's my email address. You can get in touch if that's useful. And I don't know, are you sharing these, Fran, afterwards? The slide deck, so I don't need to leave that on.
I will be, yes, I will be.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah, feel free to link to any of those and I'll stop sharing. Thank you.
Thanks, Justine. And yes, Justine picked up on a good point there. I will share all the slide decks and information that comes up in the chat as well. So our final introduction, Paolo, would you like to talk to us about NATSCA?
Yeah, so I'm just going to do a very quick whistle stop tour. I mean, really, for us, natural science collections are, obviously the thing we're primarily interested in, making sure that they're well supported, and making sure the people who look after them are well supported. They are, vital for understanding global, national, and local issues relating to the natural environment. So they're really important things to be able to not only look after and have available for use, but also to figure out how they can be used and to share the information that they contain. So as a SSN, we've been around for about almost 50 years. We've got somewhere between 250 and 300 members at any given time, and generally have about £20,000 a year annual turnover, which is all money which comes from membership and from running events and so on. So when events are run, they're not run to generate profit, but if they're successful, then they will put money back into the way the consortium operates. So really, it's about providing a supportive community for doing all the sorts of things which have already been discussed by other people in their SSNs. And really, it's one of our big focuses is professional development, and partly that's about developing specialist skills and encouraging people who don't necessarily have that skill set, but they have those collections to look after, to upskill in those areas. But it's also about talking about important topics within the kind of wider museum and cultural sector, and making sure that specialists are aware of those. So things like decolonisation and big kind of global issues around things like digitization of data and making it accessible for things like the DISCO and GBIF, and these organisations which are data aggregators for biological data. So those are the sorts of things which we kind of try to push forward and make sure that our specialists that are involved with the organisation are aware of these bigger topics, and also people who are not specialists are able to get the support they need to look after those specialist collections. So really, it's about sharing information and supporting our membership through a variety of different means, be it bursaries, through our journal, through our training. So that's the kind of the general gist of what's going on with NATSCA. And I'll leave it there because I'm sure there's questions and things people want to ask about their own networks and about how they might want to grow those and develop them.
Lovely, great, thanks, Paolo. So I hope that's given everybody a flavour of the real range in all senses, whether it's topics, whether it's structures, whether it's the sort of information that's being delivered, but there's this sort of golden thread to do the support around that specialist knowledge. The lion's share of the time that we have left, so we've got about an hour and 20 minutes left on the session, we're going to work through or discuss through 5 different topics and just have a brown sort of panel chat around governance, funding and finance, how each of the SSNs are growing their networks, how they operate as advocates, and finally looking at their research functions. We will take around 11 o'clock, depending on where we are with our discussions, we will take a 5-minute comfort break as well to give everybody a breather. So kicking off, we'll start with governance. So having listened to everybody, we have a mixture of governance structures on the panel today. And I thought I would start, since 3 of you have got a charitable setup, I thought I'd start there with those of you who are CIOs and CICs. Justine, can I come to you first and ask you why a CIC structure is suitable, is the best structure for sporting heritage?
Yeah, no problem. So for those of you who might not know what a CIC is, a community interest company. So It's a not-for-profit organisation. It has a board, it has all the checks and balances that are in place that you would expect to have, but it doesn't have quite so many regulations in place as a charity might have. So for a small constituted group of individuals, as we were when we started, that was a very sensible route for us to go down. It meant that we could be really responsive to the sector's needs, but we were still delivering those robust kind of governance and financial processes at the same time that funders needed. So that's why we're set up as a CIC. There are huge benefits to it in the fact that it does mean we are very quick and active. It means we can work with lots of policymakers and funders who recognise us as not-for-profit organisation, who are very much about supporting the sector, and we can access lots of funding in that way. There are negatives in it, in that trusts and foundations specifically are still not quite understanding that CICs have a very similar kind of outlook to charities. And so sometimes you'll go to a trust and foundation and they've got very clear guidelines that you have to be a charity to be able to access their funding. That's really where the kind of downside of it is in terms of all the other kind of delivery. It's working well for us, but we are coming to a stage now where we've been functioning for about 10 years and we need to go back and look at our governance again and think about, do we have everything that we need? Actually, is there an opportunity to shift and change how the governance is working? And that's something that we will continue to keep doing and looking at and making sure we're doing the best for the sector.
Yes, it's really interesting that the governance structures can sort of change and evolve as a network grows. And I think that's something that was applicable to NATSCA. Am I right in saying that, Paolo, that the governance structure for NATSCA changed in that way?
Yeah, definitely. So when we first started out, it was just a network of people, and there was some people holding on to some money, and then we became a charity, and that was partly because the MLA was kind of starting up this SSN kind of thread of funding many years ago, and we wanted to tap into that, so we became a charity in order to be able to access that funding, and that required a constitution. It required quite strong governance to be in place in order to be able to manage and process that funding. And what we found was that there's a bit less flexibility involved in running a charity compared to some of the more recently kind of developed charitable structures. So we switched over to CIO, Charitable Incorporated Organisation, a couple of years ago now, and it was just before COVID, so it's been quite a long process because of the banking side of it. It wasn't straightforward. The actual transfer to the CIO was relatively easy. The banking side and getting all of that kind of up and running when you change status is actually probably the most complex bit. So our treasurer had a nightmare with that. So that's actually a very useful thing to be aware of, because as soon as you change your status, you become a different organisation, you become a different body. So that's probably the biggest problem with changing status, and it's something you really do need to be aware of, because it can be a right pain in the neck, because if you can't spend your money, you've got the funds there to be able to use them, but you can't realistically access them. It becomes a real issue. So you do need to be.
Lovely, thanks. And I know that, Erin, that you changed from a previous structure to a CIO as well. Was it for similar reasons?
Yeah, I mean, we were, as sort of Paolo mentioned there, sort of a loose network of people, and if we receive funding, then we were all personally liable for that funding, which was very frightening when you're applying for like £80,000. So that's why we decided to become a charity. And to be honest, it was a really straightforward process. I mean, we were quite lucky that we have legal counsel at the National, and they were quite happy to sort of advise us pro bono on how to navigate through the CIO status. The application took a while. I would say the most complicated thing is the banking. I think just in general, banking is very complicated when you're a network and you change treasurer quite regularly, so that has been a bit of a challenge for us, and with very different fees once we became a charity. I think the trustee having limited liability has been really helpful, and I think one of the things we found quite interesting was that we had a constitution prior to becoming a charity, but we had to basically adopt the exact template that the Charity Commission wanted us to adopt, you know, which is massively longer than our normal constitution, and we didn't have a lot of flexibility in that, which ended up not really being a problem with our members, but it may be for some of you and what you want to do with it. But for us, you know, it means you're quite limited in your wording, and they do scrutinize, you know, what you send in. But it was quite a straightforward process. It's quite time consuming, but it took us probably just over a year. But I think it's definitely beneficial for applying for funding in the future.
Great, thank you for that, Erin. But looking at obviously war and conflict and the Society for Museum Archaeologists or Archaeology, you're probably sort of one of the newest and one of the oldest subject specialist networks, and yet you've chosen different structures. So Gail, why have you chosen the route that you've gone down as an organisation?
I think it's something that evolved from the beginning. It started off as a committee of people that were obviously interested in saying something about the state of museum archaeology. We are a membership organisation. We are all volunteers. I had a quick tot up of how many people are actually officers or committee members that are involved with the running of the organisation. We've got 18 people that are involved, some of whom have specific responsibilities. So we have a proper secretary, a treasurer, a chair, a vice chair, editor, etc., for all the different activities that we're doing. But we also have ordinary members of the committee who will step up into place. There's a kind of succession planning that goes on within the committee structure itself. Obviously, we're funded through the membership. We seem to have no problems whatsoever at the moment in attracting people wanting to be volunteers, to be part of the committee and take part in what we're doing. And there's a tremendous amount of flexibility there's lots of work we don't have to do because we're not a charity, and we can set our own agendas. It's not to say that how our committee structure has not changed during the time that we've been in existence. And so where those committee members are drawn from maybe has changed. We have altered the constitution itself on a number of occasions over the last 3 or 4 years. We have representatives from the different parts of the UK that can be reporting or corresponding. But we've also got representation from other kinds of organisations so that we have more diverse kind of cognitive thinking within the committee. So, for example, people from commercial units or different types of organisation. Like, I think at one point we did say that we'd have representatives from the Museums Association, from the National Museums, etc. And actually we have reduced that requirement to be as constricted by where those volunteers come from.
Lovely, thanks, Gail. And as one of our newer networks, Charlotte, obviously when you were setting up, you must have had to look at how you were going to work as an organisation. So can you tell us a little bit about the sort of process that you went through?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, the networks run by and through Imperial War Museum, so it's sort of slightly different. The museum itself is a charity, and obviously has structures that we could make use of. And yeah, we got Arts Council England funding to set up the network. And in terms of how it's run and governed, we have an internal project board that oversees our activity, but we also have a steering group which is made up of members, including Fran, and people that you know have a vested interest in what we do, and so that's sort of how we run things basically. And yeah, obviously I can talk a bit about funding in the next part, but effectively my role is provided by IWM as an employee, but the actual activities that we do is slightly different.
Lovely, thanks, Charlotte. And yes, I think that's an important distinction to draw out, isn't it? That a lot of the SSNs, those who are running them, are have paid positions within their own home organisations and run their SSNs as volunteers. Your role is partly covered by IWM, I know, with Sporting Heritage and with other networks such as the Army Museum Ogilvy Trust, there is a core team that are paid staff, and then they work with sort of freelance consultancy. So there's a whole range of different setups. So just before we move on to funding and finance, if I was to ask the panel, what would be your, if you had to go back to the beginning and decide on your governance structures, what would be your top tips for working out which structure works for you? Bit of a broad question. Who would like to jump in on that?
I would say you've got to be mindful of who wants to be part of your network in the first place, because if you've got a very small pool of possibilities to be volunteers, then that makes it really difficult to run as a volunteer organisation. So if you're a very, very small group, and we've got some very small subject specialist networks within the consortium, then a volunteer run organisation is perhaps not the best for you. And then also, if you're thinking about where the finance is going to come from as well, because we know we've got broadly two types of SSNs, ones which are membership based, potentially with what I would describe as a more traditional museum type subject that find their funding through membership, but also those SSNs which are funded through project funding that has come specifically from, say, Arts Council, and have a lifespan based within an organisation. So I think you really need to look at who are your friends, whether you could be part of another organisation instead of trying to go it alone, for example. And I think that's something that we should be encouraging more, rather than fragment what we're doing. We need to kind of go for sharing the expertise and actually the workload. So for us, we do have really quite a wide pool of people to draw from, but for some of the other networks, there isn't. So I don't think volunteer-led would be appropriate in that situation.
Lovely, thanks, Gail. Does anybody want to jump in before we move on? Justine?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Gail's saying there. Yeah, who you network and where's your money going to come from? It's just fundamental in terms of working out what kind of structures you need. There was an organisation that existed that before us that was just a group of individuals working at sports museums who came together, and that didn't work working in a different organisation. It was kind of at the National Football Museum, because they competed for funding. So the network was competing with an organisation, so it had to be something separate. So thinking about, is there going to be competition further down the line? Do you need to be individual? Can you work within another network that already exists? I think, again, what Gail's saying, that's fundamental. Yeah, I suppose that's kind of, yeah, my kind of adding to, yeah.
Lovely. I think that those two comments sort of provide us with the sort of perfect bridge into our second topic, which is looking at funding and finance, which obviously is key, as you've both just said, and has cropped up with a lot of what everybody else has said, is key to how you might decide how you might govern your organisation. So thinking about funding and finance, a lot of the SSNs are membership organisations. So those of you who charge a membership fee, I know, Charlotte, your network is free. So we'll come back and talk about your funding separately. But for those of you who charge a membership fee, how do you then reinvest that, and how do you demonstrate that sort of benefit back out to your network and your members? Who would like to start there? I should pick on somebody. Paolo, do you want to start?
Yeah. We charge a membership fee. I think it's £20 at the moment, £20 for an annual membership. And the way that tends to get dealt with is the money goes into the pots. Then we use that to kind of run events. And obviously we do charge for the events, but you get a discount if you're a member. So it means that immediately you're discounted on any kind of training and so on. So it means that we're able to open up the training to non-members, but they obviously pay a bit more. So you get an advantage of membership. And certainly the advantage of membership is always at least the cost of membership. So it kind of becomes cost neutral as soon as you go to one training event or whatever. You also get a copy of the journal, which is published every year. And you get that copy either as a hard copy or electronic, whichever you prefer, or you always get the electronic, but you can also get a hard copy for no extra cost. But those are also then made available freely after 1 year, but for the first year they are kind of behind a paywall, which is again membership. And we also offer things like bursaries, both individual bursaries for things like travel and attending conferences and so on. But also there's the Bill Pettit Award, which is a kind of a small pot for funding collections work with natural science collections. So usually it's a piece of conservation around an object that's going to be used for an exhibition, or maybe buying materials to curate a collection of insects which are really important for some reason, and someone's got a project built around that. So it's to provide the kind of a couple of grand here and there where you just need that little bit of extra input to get a really kind of useful result from usually a bigger project that you're working on, or just to kind of support your activity in a smaller collection. So it means that there's kind of quite low requirements to get those sorts of pots of funding. But one of those requirements is that you're a member. And so again, it's just to open up those opportunities to members. And it works very well. And what we found is during COVID, we've moved a lot of things online, which has reduced some of the overheads, and I'm sure other people have experienced this. And it means that while we still have the same sort of membership, it means that we have more money going in, which means we're able to put more money into those bursaries and so on. So yeah, there are some advantages to that.
Lovely, thanks, Paolo. So for those of you who are also charge membership, do you do anything different to the sort of activity that Paolo's described? Do you find that your membership fees are sufficient to cover the activity that you want? Justine, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so we're currently updating our membership offer to does similar things to what Paolo's talking about as well. It's that kind of making sure that it's almost doesn't make sense to not have a membership if you're going to come to conference or events, but then also looking at what other benefits can be there. The other thing that we use it for is investing in community grants. So we know a lot of organisations that we work with are really tiny, so they might be local sports clubs, or it might be a small local authority museum who are wanting to do some stuff around sporting heritage, but then just need a little bit of seed funding. So it will go into the community grants pot and be able to give them a bit of funding back out. But we're constantly looking at how do we ensure that that benefit is going back out into the sector, whether it's through training or whether it's through providing additional funds.
Lovely, thanks. Gail, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to talk about some of the hidden benefits of membership. So we do all the kinds of things that Paolo talked about. We have a conference that we're running. Actually, we've got our first in-person conference next week, which is heavily subsidised, and that's because obviously we made savings by not having to do various things during the COVID period and doing things virtually. We provide regular email updates. So we do all of that kind of the journal stuff, the products, the networking. We've got bursaries that you can apply for. We've got an awards for excellence program going. But I think it's also important for us as a volunteer organisation to understand that we advocate on behalf of a group of people, and that does actually also cost money. So if we need to go to represent the interest of museum archaeologists at a meeting, for example, prior to Zoom, we were buying train tickets, or we would enable committee members who were self-funded to be able to join in the conversation. So we've made sure that we are more inclusive in the way that we can do that, and we also use that money to pay people in the sense that none of our speakers at conferences speak at our conference at their expense. So actually their expenses are met, whether that's through subsistence or travel or any kind of requirement that might need to be there, because they're doing us a favour. And unfortunately, that's not the way that most of those kinds of in-person conferences are going. And we don't require people to be members of our society in order to be able to speak, because we want to be open, we want to share all kinds of views that are representative. So I think there are those hidden kinds of speaking up for others that there is a cost to, apart from all of the products that we give back again.
Lovely, thanks. Erin.
Thanks. Yeah, I completely agree, Gail. And we've actually started paying speakers to come to our events if they're non-APAC members. So if they're coming from an outside organisation, we will pay them a flat fee to do that. However, APAC members aren't given a fee, but all of their travel expenses and everything are met, and all of our events are free for our members, but there's a small fee if you're a non-member. I think one thing I just wanted to add was the transparency at meetings about how you're spending that money. So I think, particularly when we became a charity, we report on the budget and also progress against strategy and KPIs at every member meeting. So that's 4 times a year. So that if there are any questions around how members' money is being spent, there's lots of opportunity for them to question it and ask us, why was that particular event so expensive? And I think that level of transparency is really important. And we also try and hammer home to everyone that it is a voluntary board, and that we are all giving our time for free. And touch wood, we've never had any sort of issues around that. But yeah, we just kind of say that transparency is quite important.
Yes, I think transparency around finances at whatever level is vital, isn't it? So thinking outside of the finances that come in through membership schemes, so for those of you who've gone for grant funding, and maybe Charlotte, if I can come to you first, because I know that's how you set up your network. What have your experiences been like about applying for grant funding, and how do you use grant funding? So Charlotte, can I come to you first?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we set up the network through an Arts Council England grant, and a lot of the money was used for things like we've just heard about, like travel and subsistence, arranging in-person events, arranging bespoke workshops with external speakers and paying them, etc. But yeah, I mean, because of COVID, because we changed to digital, obviously a lot of those costs effectively disappeared, short of, a Zoom subscription. So we're kind of reviewing things at the moment, because we do want to retain the online element, but we do want to bring back the in-person as well. So we are going to be looking for other sources of funding. We've also been really grateful to receive funding from the Art Fund and from Esme Fairbairn Collections Fund. They were for specific bespoke projects within the network, and they were working with a small group of members, but to the benefit of the whole network, so that we could share lessons learned, etc. So I think that kind of model is something we might want to take going forward, in that, if you like, the running costs of the network are absorbed by my role at the museum and doing things online. But if we do want to do more in-person things, which we do want to, we are going to have to look for external funding.
Lovely, thank you. And I just from my knowledge of Sporting Heritage, I know that's a similar route. We have external funding for projects. So do you want to talk about sort of the project work that Sporting Heritage undertake, Justine, and then maybe Gail, I can come to you as well.
Yeah, so we started off with kind of the more sort of traditional routes of like Heritage Lottery Fund through Resilience Grant to kind of set ourselves up, and then we looked at the wider funding base, really. So we were able to access funding from sport itself to look after the heritage. So we've had a big Sport England funding. We were also able to work with other policymakers. So the Welsh Government supported us to develop a strategic framework for sport and heritage in Wales. So things like that we were able to access, demonstrating where our activity delivers across those other agendas. And then smaller pots of funding, so things like Arts Fund, have been really, really supportive of our work and how we are looking specifically at collections and how we're digitising what we do so that we're reaching more audiences. But I suppose what I'd say is always there's a real temptation, I mean, in any kind of funding, isn't there, an organisation to kind of go, oh, there's some money over there, let's go and get that. And it's that kind of ensuring that you know what you want to do first and then going and get the funding from there, rather than kind of going, oh, I've got this cash, but it's not doing what we want it to do, and it's leading us down a different route. And we've definitely been guilty of that at times as well, where we're trying to be very, very strategic and thinking, what do we need to do? How are we going to do it? and who will support us in funding that, and then building those relationships up with those funders for potentially being able to go back and have them support in a longer term. But I would definitely say for us, we, like Gail was saying, we couldn't be voluntary led. It would be, I think it would be an impossibility, because there's such a large sector working with so many different organisations. We would just scratch the surface and those collections would just disappear. Most of them aren't held in the heritage sector. So I suppose you're thinking as well about what are you trying to achieve? Who holds the collections? How are you going to access them? And how much is it going to cost for you to be able to do that? If you're working predominantly in the museum sector, for example, that might be easier. The networks might already exist. But if you're having to go out and say, right, I need to understand about how I'm accessing, I don't know, netball collections that are largely within minority communities, I need to know how to go and do that. And it's going to take a lot of capacity to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, so you can see how those pots of money suddenly become vital. But like you say, it's very easy to fall into that trap of chasing the money, isn't it? But actually taking that more strategic approach is far better. Gail, do you want to talk about some of the funding that you've received beyond
Yeah,
that?
so the two main funders for activities beyond our membership subscriptions have been Historic England and Arts Council England. And the one thing that I would say in terms of, I totally agree with Justine, the best thing to do is to understand what you're trying to do and then fund that rather than chase the rainbow, which is all kinds of funding pots. And I think, you know, from an SSN consortium perspective, we've shared intelligence about how funding bodies actually work and also the application route. So we are lucky in the sense that we do know what the kinds of language that you need to write are in particular applications, particularly for Arts Council England. We did know that there was a resilience fund coming. We'd already started planning what our bid would be like before it was opened, for the very few weeks that it was opened over a summer period, for example. So we had a head start. So you have to have strategic planning in place if you know that's going to happen. And then equally, we have members of our committee who are associated with or work for Historic England. So that gives us an insight into research programmes that are appropriate for our work to be funded by and how it fits into it. But it does, applying for all of that, wherever you're going to, does apply a degree. You need a degree of intelligence about the sector in order to be able to really tap into it. And if you don't have that sector intelligence, you need to go and ask somebody else who does. And that's why the SSN consortium has been a really useful thing, I think, for a lot of SSNs. So yes, we've had resilience funding from Arts Council. Worst part about that is the reporting back process and the grantium system that you go into. And we've had project funding from Historic England, which has a very defined way of writing project designs. And we've become much more savvy in terms of building the costs of actually delivering the project into those funding applications, because we could have been on burnout in terms of volunteer time and effort for delivery. But now we've gone to a stage where we know what it costs for a project design to be drawn up. We'll go for a stage one to do that, and then we'll employ you know, it might go to tender for a group to help us deliver the project. So there's more complexity than just there's a pot of money, we'll go for it. It's about how you actually get to it in the first place.
Lovely, thanks, Gail. I think yes, that all those issues around capacity to actually be able to see the funding coming, the opportunities to then marshal your information to write the bid. I think being able to share that information or ask for advice through the consortium has been a great benefit, particularly for the smaller networks. Charlotte, do you want to just jump in, and then what we'll do is we'll have a short comfort break. So if you want to take us up to that point.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, just a brief point really. With funding, it's always well worth, before you even begin, looking at kind of the terms and conditions of the funding. So as the name suggests, Arts Council England would want you to do activity in England that benefit English organisations, which obviously for many of us, because we want to go over borders and internationally, it's just worth bearing in mind. it's not to say you can't do activity outside of that. I think there is sort of a threshold that they will allow, but it's just worth bearing in mind before you begin that their expectation will be that you are targeting a specific group of people.
Lovely. Yes, I think that, yes, read the guidance. I think that's what should be written in large across all funding applications, shouldn't it? And then right at the end before you submit. So thank you everybody for your contributions so far. We're just at 11:10 and we've done the first 2 of our 5 topics. I suggest we take a 5-minute comfort break. So if everybody could be back for 11:15 and we'll start again. See everybody soon. Thank you. Welcome back everybody. I can see people returning with their vital cups of tea for part 2. So in our first half, we've covered our governance and finance and funding. So in our remaining sort of 45 minutes, we're going to look at growing your network, advocacy and research. So we couldn't be a network if we weren't looking for members. So looking at how you might grow your network is where we're going to start now. Erin, could I come to you first? Could you talk about how, as a performing arts network, you look at expanding your members?
Yeah, I think primarily it's word of mouth from all of our members, but we have now got a banner, we've got leaflets, we've got business cards, so that whenever we're out at events in our own capacity, as for example me at the National Theatre, you can still spread word about APAC. One of the things we have done is that we have a list from, I think, the Collections Trust of every performing arts collection, which used to be hosted on our website. And so we are working our way through that list and contacting those organisations individually to tell them about APAC. And we have lots of information in terms of membership benefits that they might get, and particularly focusing on the networking side, so trying to explain to potential members about other members that are within their area. So we're very aware that a lot of our members are in London, but actually if you're in Leeds, for example, we have 5 or 6 members in Leeds, and so making sure that they are all aware of who each other are so that they can kind of take it upon themselves to have networking meetings or collaborative projects, and so it doesn't always need to be APAC that's driving that, but making that awareness is APAC's job. So we're working our way through that list of collections and trying to get new members through that. We do get quite a lot of new members through funded projects. So if they have National Lottery funding, quite often there'll be a project team in place. And so those people will join as project archivists or project managers for that particular funded project. And then it's about how we work with them to show them the value of APAC to continue to be a member after the funded project is finished. So it's that kind of sustainability and the longer term planning that we want to focus on as well. And also we have blog posts and quite a lot of advocacy that we do, particularly, as I said, through Twitter, reaching lots of different collections. And we also have joint events, which we find really helpful for bringing in new members. So we've run joint events with networks like the Society for Theatre Research, which is focused more on academics who are researching theatre rather than the people holding the collections, which are the members of APAC. So bringing those 2 networks together has been really valuable, not just in building bridges between those 2 sets of people, but also sharing membership. We've had a lot of extra people join because of that. So I think the joint events are something that we are going to continue to do, and we're always looking for, other SSNs who might be interested in doing that, and we might have, areas that we share specialisms. So that's also been helpful for advocating for what APAC does and getting those new members in.
Lovely, thank you. So is anybody else working in that sort of strategic way to grow their networks? Who would like to jump in on that?
I'm going to say something about us being audience focused. As organisations, we always talk about our audience focus, and therefore we kind of, if we're going to attract new people, we need to know who we're already dealing with. So actually SMA did a quick and dirty survey last year to try and find out who we actually were, who we were representing in the first place before we could even think about how do we go outside of that. So there's some quite interesting things that have come out of that. Of the people that responded, about a third of them identify themselves as having some form of disability, which was actually really quite surprising. If you think about most networks, so we were doing something really well for them in terms of communication. We're predominantly female in terms of our membership. but also we're not all museum archaeologists, which is a really good thing as far as we're concerned, because we have therefore achieved kind of like our aim. We changed our name. We were the Society for Museum Archaeologists. We are not the Society for Museum Archaeologists anymore. We are for museum archaeology, which means that we're open to anybody who has a vested interest with anything to do with archaeology and museums. And I've just had a quick look at the figures that came from the survey, and about 40% of our members do not work in the museum. So they're working either for academic organisations, other types of heritage organisations, and commercial units. And the commercial aspect for us is quite important, because obviously museums are in receipt of developer funded projects that come from the commercial world, and we need to tie our processes together to make us more streamlined, best practice and things like that. So I think that is being reflected in the proportion of types of members that we actually have. And so what we need to do next now is take the full results of that survey and then decide what the strategy is to grow the membership.
Yes, that's really interesting, that your heritage members versus non-heritage members. I think it just shows the value of subject specialist networks to bring together people who've got that golden thread of archaeology, but to make that assumption that they're all in the heritage sector, your surveys just completely sort of undermined that, and just shows what a fantastic vehicle SSNs can be for bringing people together across sectors. Charlotte, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just following on from what Gail said. So we've done some evaluation as well, so we can find out more about who our members are. We can ask them how they found out about us as well. So that's obviously a good way of finding out what methods are working well. But yeah, similarly, kind of addressing gaps, if you like, in our membership where perhaps some areas are less well represented, be that demographics, be it geographically, be it subject matter as well, because we cover effectively over 100 years of history. So it's kind of working those things out, but then using that to kind of make direct approaches as well. So if we know of an organisation or an individual that we think might like to join, actually reaching out to them and telling them a bit about what we do and everything like that. Because, you know, as Gail was just saying with the name, you know, I think even the word subject specialist network can put some people off a little bit, because they might think, well, I'm not a specialist. What am I going to bring to the party? But it's not about that really. It's all about sharing ideas and developing knowledge, etc. So yeah, there are definite challenges there, but there's also a lot of potential.
Yeah, definitely. Justine.
Yeah, I'd echo everything that's just been said, but I wanted to say as well that one of the things we've noticed is when we're going for funding, one of the difficulties can be making that leap between what we do as an SSN and the organisations we work with, and who the direct audiences are at the end of that. So some of it is work that we're doing directly with an audience through lots of digital stuff, or maybe through our educational resources, that kind of stuff. So we know those audiences. But some of what we do, and probably the large proportion of what we do, is how we support the sector to then reach audiences. Now, making that argument to some of the funding bodies can be really difficult. We just commissioned quite a bit of research over COVID to understand that. Who are we working with? How are they working with their audiences, and do they know? And one of the things that we found out was that no, they don't know. They don't know who they're working with, and they don't know what impact they're having, and they don't know how to change that. So we're now looking at, okay, so how do we get a really good, robust kind of body of information and understanding about what it is that our sector does and our organisations do and these collections do that impacts across all of these different agendas, so that we're not saying, oh, we know anecdotally it happens, but so that we're actually really giving hard and fast figures, which we're starting to grow now, being able to say we know these amount of collections exist, and we know these are at risk, and we know this is what impact that's going to have. And being able to do that helps increase your network members. It helps them go and access funding themselves, and it helps us be able to advocate better for them. And I know we're going to talk about advocacy in a bit, but that understanding those audiences is absolutely crucial, I think, and our sector's not traditionally very good at doing that.
Yes, that reminds me of a conversation that we've had at one of the SSN consortium executive meetings, where yes, you look at the number of So you may have a dozen SSNs who then may support, say, 24 members of staff and then within a individual organisations, whether they're heritage organisations or outside of the sector. But then how do you evidence and map the impact they have on the possibly the end audience for those? It's really difficult to demonstrate and evidence that sort of process in a way that is meaningful for us as organisations, but I suppose vitally what is meaningful for funders. Paolo, you had your hand up and I wanted to ask you, because I know that NATSCA have done some strategic work around your membership a while back, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So we actually got funding from the Arts Council to conduct a kind of a strategic review of how we ran the organisation. This is in the very early days of the Arts Council taking on the kind of funding for subject specialist networks. And that was really helpful because it meant that we were able to actually go through and review, who were our members, and to look at what we were doing and look at the ways we were doing it. And we kind of tried to, one of the things we noticed was we had an awful lot of subject specialists who were members, but we weren't very good at reaching out to some of those kind of non-specialists who were having to work with museum collections that they didn't really necessarily understand very well. And so one of the things we did was to try to kind of increase the amount of kind of training, professional development and so on for the slightly less specialists, who are coming in sometimes cold on how to work with these sorts of collections. And we've certainly found that that has helped to grow the kind of membership kind of immediately quite well. Now, it's one of those things that's quite difficult because if you've got to get a balance right, because we want to support the specialists as well, and we rely on the specialists to provide training for each other and for the non-specialists. So, the idea is that you've got to get everyone kind of happily working. So, you will get criticism saying, oh, well, it's not specialists. It used to be more specialists, so therefore, it's not as good as it used to be. And that's an argument you get from the specialists. But then, of course, the non-specialists will be, well, we don't know what the hell you're talking about most of the time, so it's not very helpful for us. So trying to get that balance is quite important. But I think the main thing is the thing which came back from an awful lot of the responses you get from people, especially when you just ask them, is that they like the fact that it's a kind of a friendly environment. They like the fact that it's a very kind of communal way of approaching problems. So that element of how the organisation worked is something that we've kind of tried to stick with, and it kind of works. Basically, if you're friendly and approachable, it makes it much easier to continue to have those conversations, and it makes people more willing to join because they see benefits from the actual just that community that's there. So I think that element it still works, but I think the trouble with that is COVID has had an impact on it. Because as soon as you're not meeting in person, as soon as you're having kind of remote events, it's very, very different. It's much harder to be friendly online than it is, in person. So it's those sorts of things which will have an impact, I'm sure. Now I'm not on the committee. I'm not looking at the kind of the reporting on all of this because I'm not directly involved. But it's the kind of thing I can go back and ask Isla about, who's the current chair.
Yes, it's interesting what you were saying about the impact of COVID, and I'm sure we felt it across all of our networks. In some ways, going online has worked brilliantly if you've got a UK-wide network, because you can bring people together from a geographic spread that was very, not impossible, but very difficult to do when you're thinking of all the travel and overnight accommodation, and even, the number of cups of tea and packets of biscuits you need to bring everybody together for a decent meeting. And to be able to just jump on and have a quick meeting for half an hour, putting people, together across all the borders is fantastic. But you're right, it doesn't replace seeing people in person. I mean, we found that when we, for the Sporting Heritage Awards, which is our first in-person event this year, meeting colleagues that we'd all been working with for, since just right at the beginning of the pandemic, and having never met them in person, and just being able to have those conversations and see those nuances in a way that you can't do online. So that sort of covered growing our networks, and I know that I will share everybody's contact details so that people know how to get onto your e-groups, e-list groups and JISC mails that I know that everybody has. So if you want to tap into different ways to connect with the networks we have here today, I will share all of that. But thinking sort of broadly about that and moving on to advocacy, obviously one of the key roles for us as subject specialist networks is to advocate on behalf of our members. Gail, can I come to you first and ask you about how advocacy works within the archaeology sphere?
So I think I showed you that slide in my little presentation about all the different kinds of organisations that we belong to. So one of the key things is to look outwardly and not necessarily towards other organisations that are very similar to your own. There are umbrella groups for different kinds of organisations. So one of them is the Archaeology Forum, for example, which incorporates things like the Council of British Archaeology, CIFA, Historic England, University Archaeology UK, and so there is a discussion group there and actions that they take, and they advocate on behalf of the sector. But significantly, there's also access to an all-party parliamentary archaeology group. And so one of the things that I feel has been really key to us is to understand who the decision makers are and how you get the messages to those decision makers matters, and in particular the data. So understanding, coming back to something that Justine referenced just there, we collected data so that we didn't have apocryphal kind of like stories, hearsay about what exactly was going on. We knew there was a drop in the number of specialist archaeological curators in museums. We knew that we were running out of space. We could tell you that, but we needed to articulate exactly what it looked like so that we could provide that data. And we also needed to share that with other organisations who would speak on our behalf. One of the most significant things that I think happened as a result of all of that was there's a whole paragraph devoted to archaeological archives and better working between Arts Council England and Historic England relating to archives in the Mendoza Review of Museums. And that one little paragraph just there and the actions that have come out of it have been so useful for not just the museums but the wider archaeological sector in terms of developing an action plan going forward that affects us on a national basis. And so understanding how you can use the information and who you need to get to speak on your behalf is the key for advocacy. It's not just about us as museum archaeologists or subject specialists talking to other subject specialists or within. It's how you get that message out, and to understand the impact, you need the data.
Yes, it sits at the heart of everything that we need to sort of communicate, doesn't it? So just thinking about that sort of top level advocacy, in sort of the political sense. Justine, can I come to you, and could you talk about Sporting Heritage's links with the all party parliamentary groups, and also and then maybe move on to talking about advocating for sport within sort of funding agendas as well. I know that's something that you do a lot.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, you join me as a puppy has decided it wants to bark at things behind me, so just cross your fingers. Yeah, so yeah, echo what Gail says about that looking outwards, and we do a lot of work in trying to ensure how we oh, he's only 6 months, and he's meant to be asleep. I might have to go and come to somebody else because, as I said, do you want to do that, Fran?
I'll jump on and we'll come back to you. So would anybody else like to jump in and talk about how they advocate on behalf of their network looking outwards? Erin?
Yeah, I think that looking outwards, absolutely, that's what we're trying to do, and I think trying to target specific sector bodies that we think will be beneficial. I think one of the things we struggle with slightly is that APAC's always had a very big archive focus, but we also obviously have members who are based within museums and libraries. And I think as well that sort of is a challenge for us with the Arts Council, who are very museum focused. And so whenever we do applications for funding, because we have so many members who are archivists, that can be really challenging to try and make the case for the museum members. So we are trying to expand who it is that we're talking with. So the National Archives are a member, and their sort of arts representative comes along to meetings, which is hugely helpful. But we're trying to do the same with the Museums Association, with CILIP, and with sort of regional museum networks as well. So that's something we are starting out on, and I feel like the SSN consortium will probably be really helpful for us in making that happen. But I think it is that kind of very top level advocacy that's going to be helpful for our members, and providing a kind of conduit for them to have the conversations that they need to have.
Lovely, thank you. Now I see you have a friend on your lap now, Justine, so can we come back to you quickly, and then Paolo will come to you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, the all party parliamentary group is looking at sport in the north, and for the first time we've tried so hard to get people to think about where does sporting heritage fit, because it impacts across both sectors. Sport in terms of they have different audiences traditionally to heritage and vice versa, and this is the first time that we've actually got them right at the start when they're thinking about the strategy. Where does heritage fit with that? So we're kind of central to it, and that's been through similar work to what the other panelists have been talking about, just reaching out and saying, this is the impact, this is the difference that we make, this is why you need to think about where sporting heritage fits within the work that you're doing. And sometimes it's getting other people to talk on our behalf, and so yeah, we get a lot of sporting ambassadors, high profile sports people talking about why sporting heritage is important, and that sometimes makes the shift. And then there was something else you asked me to talk about as well, Fran, about
speaking to heritage funders. So I suppose traditionally I'm thinking about the lottery funders, about where sport fits within their remit, which sometimes it doesn't always seem like a natural fit.
That's been really crucial, particularly right at the start. There was a lot of misunderstanding about where does sport fit, a bit of snobbery I think as well, in terms of, you know, why are these collections as important as some of the others. That has shifted massively as people have started to see the real link towards communities. And that's been through developing things like campaigns like National Sporting Heritage Day, that are, like Gail saying, not just kind of us saying, oh, well, we think it's important, but demonstrating what difference does it make when a sporting heritage activity happens on the ground in a community? What's the difference that that makes? And when we're able to translate that and share it and show it through images of what's happened and through facts and figures of what's happened, that's when the funders and the policymakers listen to what we're saying. It's through the stories that we're able to demonstrate, I think, as much as anything else.
Lovely, thank you for answering in the face of adversity there. Paolo, can we come to you next?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to make the point that really for us, from ages ago, we took two approaches to advocacy. One is to kind of go through the more political channels and try to, you know, engage with things like the Mendoza Review and all those sorts of things. And the other is to just engage the public and to try to kind of get your voice out there through media and all the rest of it. Those are the two kind of routes we've taken, because obviously they support each other, but especially the public one coming back helps a lot. I think for us, one of the big things that we decided would be worth doing is to work with other subject specialist networks to form a consortium, so that we could increase the volume of our voices by joining them together. And really, you know, that's kind of what we're here for today. Is for me, advocacy isn't just about us shouting about how important our particular collections are, because, you know, we all think our collections are important. They are all important. People collected this stuff for a reason. It's because it's important. It has real relevance to people, to culture, to society, to the environment. Lots of different things. They're all important, and they're all really, you know, vital to make good use of. That's why we are here, because we're joining our voices to say collections are important. Collections are vital. And I think for me, that's really the point of the network. And that's why kind of Gail and Justine, we kind of got together to actually start, you know, trying to shout a little bit more loudly for subject specialist networks, because we are a really good way of, you know, advocating for our collections. You know, we're good spokespeople. You can go to national museums, which will act as a mouthpiece, but it doesn't reflect the breadth and diversity of all the collections in a nation or globally. And really, that's what it's about. It's about pulling together this bigger picture of what the collections that we all represent are all about and how they can be used. And they can all be used in very similar ways, not necessarily the specifics, but the fact that they are there to be used, and they can be used for an incredible benefit. So for me, that is where advocacy kind of, that's a big area of advocacy, which you know, we've actually spent quite a lot of time and effort on. You know, the consortium is, you know, it is one of the things which is, you know, that's why I'm still on, like, involved in the NATS committee at the moment, because I'm sitting on the consortium. So I think it's worth just flagging that the consortium plays an important role in this, and, you know, there will be more that we can do in the future, but at the moment we're still consolidating, and, you know, it's nice to see this taking place, so that we are, you know, demonstrating that is consolidation.
Yes, I think that's a very, very valuable point, but also because we're all the different collections that make up the SSNs and the SSNs that make up the consortium were all part of this massively interlinked ecosystem for the historical, scientific, artistic record, and broader. So yes, I think our coming together, we can only be stronger. Gail.
I was just going to say something about the network of networks and why it was a really important step forward. So in about 2015, when we were going through a big wave of austerity measures and museums were starting to close, I realised there was no actual way of us all communicating with each other. There was no network of networks. We didn't even have an up-to-date list of who to contact via the Arts Council website on their out-of-date PDF spreadsheet and it literally relied on who do I know who is a member of this in order to be able to talk to somebody. And then there was a meeting at UCL where some of us from like NAPSCA, archaeology, geologists were there as well, had been invited to talk about speaking up and advocating on behalf of collections. And it had been spawned by two unethical sales of collections, and it was about arming particularly your local groups, your friends groups, your communities and things like that to advocate on behalf of your collections. And famously, somebody who was there made a comment that of course all good curators would be able to advocate on behalf of their collections and stop something like this happening. And I had to say, but not if they're gagged by their organisation, and not if they don't have a specialist. And that is where our role comes in. And that's where the network of network really started. And I was just going to flag up, it's slightly out of date now. It was an Esme Fairbairn funded project called the Local Heritage Engagement Network. There are toolkits on the CBA website. Some of the stats and the data is out of date, but essentially it was a toolkit that was put together to enable groups. And they don't just have to be archaeological groups. It could be any group that wants to advocate on behalf of another on how you go about it and how you form that group. And obviously SSN Consortium is a kind of like souped up version of that. We're all advocating on behalf of each other and fighting for better recognition of what SSNs do and can do.
Right. Would you share a link to that in the chat, please, Gail? That'd be great. Yeah. Yeah, I have to think of the SSN Consortium like that, but with like Go Faster stripes on. Justine, can I come to you next?
Yeah, just to echo that really. And I think the real concern is that there are so many different specialist collections, and some of them are hugely at risk and some of them don't actually have networks supporting them at this moment in time. And there's a real concern and risk, I think, that some of those collections that are crucial to the telling of the historical changes that happened across the UK are going to be lost. And because there was no strategic plan about how do we look after those, and funding was coming sporadically and almost competing against collection, that the SSN Consortium was almost absolutely crucial for the museum sector as well as the heritage sector to be able to say, actually, all of these collections are important for various different reasons, for various different communities. Let's stop trying to pick different pieces that we like best or that we think have got the most relevance at the moment, and let's start thinking a bit more strategically about how they all work together. And like I was saying earlier, we've got so many collections across our network that really need the support of all the other SSNs. Sporting collections hit, we've got plastics, we've got all manner of different things within our collections that need that support. So without all of us existing, it's a real issue for all of the collection specialisms. So yeah, I think the consortium being able to advocate as a whole and being able to do that much more strategically is beneficial for all collections.
Lovely, thanks, Justine. Erin.
Yeah, just really quickly wanted to pick up on what Gail and Justine were saying. I think during COVID, one of the things that APAC and indeed SIBMAS, which is kind of the international sort of specialist network, came to the fore around was the redundancy process that was happening within theatres. So a lot of theatres were remodelling and restructuring, and for example, the National lost 600 staff over the last couple of years. So there was a lot of archives that were at risk, and I think as the specialist network, we could explain and verbalise and add a lot of weight to the arguments that those individual archivists, quite often lone archivists within those organisations, were facing. So I think that specialist label was incredibly helpful in making the case for a lot of those positions, and it wasn't just within theatres. It was like the V&A, for example, and having that conversation with Tristram Hunt about the restructure of the theatre and performance galleries and collections. So I think that's a really important advocacy point, not a very nice one, but a really important one within the sector.
Thanks, Erin. Yes, it's just getting those, being able to provide support for those. I think lone voices, the way you put it, and like I can't remember if it was Gail or Justine, you said, if you've got a lone curator, you can't always expect them to be able to stand up. I think it was you, Gail, wasn't it? If you're within an organisation that is on one trajectory, it's really hard as a lone member of staff to stand up and defend, your collection when it may put your role at risk. Which in itself will put your collection at risk. So it's knowing that there is this network of support within your SSNs, and that they are keyed into this broader network within the consortium. And I will share the link in the chat in a moment. So we're into our last 15 minutes. So I'll move us on to our last topic, which is research. And I know that we all support and facilitate research in different ways. So I think Sporting Heritage may be the only organisation that has a PhD programme. Do shout if I've got that wrong. Justine, do you want to start with that? Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we have a programme of collaborative doctoral awards. So they're all like huge acronyms. It comes from the Arts and Humanities Research Council, AHRC. They've actually just put out I can't think what it is, but the next round of applications. So it's basically where you come together as a consortium and you are able to access a certain number of PhDs, and we had 12. And those PhDs can be there to support whatever it is your focus is within your network area. There's a massive issue with them. So we were going to go in for this round of funding because it brings in, I think, about £80,000 each PhD is worth of research back into the sector. It's a phenomenal amount of support for the sector, but there is no funding for the organisation that administers it. And to be honest, I got to a stage of thinking, well, hang on a minute, it's fine if you're maybe the BM, the British Museum, and you've got a big research team to be able to manage and administer that. But as a small charitable organisation, you sit there and think, hang on, I'm using a lot of our sector's funding to do this small piece of activity that's only benefiting certain areas. Actually, that's probably not going to be seen as a very good thing by our network. It's very difficult to sit there and make that decision, but it is the decision we made. However, some of the research that we've got through those PhD programs has been amazing, and it's given us that real impact and support from the academic sector, and we've been able to grow that. But I think you could do that through approaching the AHRC with a university partner anyway, and going and developing academic research. And I'd really advocate for that. The issue, and what I would also say is really valuable, is have a research strategy for your network, because otherwise what you end up with is maybe a top heavy bit of research that's happening in the activity that's going on here. There's maybe no jobs for people to go to. You've maybe got no low level coming in. There's no diversity within that sector. So I think in terms of research, if that's something that's crucial to you, thinking about what kind of research you want to do. Is it all academic research, or do you want it to be research that is more around understanding your audiences and volunteers and that kind of area of work, or a bit of both? Putting that strategy in place and thinking how you'll fund it. We inherited that program of PhDs, and it had its reasons for being very useful, but the fact that there is no funding and investment demonstrates that the academic and research sector does not yet understand what is happening within the cultural sector. And I partly just wanted to say, actually, I know that we probably give you one of the biggest impacts in terms of research because of our audiences and the way that we've, but no, if you're not going to recognise that some investment has to come in to administer that, I reckon it costs about £20,000 to administer those every year. It's just not viable. But yeah, so if anyone's interested to know more about how to join up academic partnerships or collaborative partnerships, and it's not something that you've done or you're interested in learning more about how to do it, very happy to help and share how to do that. And likewise in terms of developing research strategies. But yeah.
Thank you. And the reason why I thought we'd start with sort of the PhD sort of top level research is I wanted to sort of talk about, and Gail, I'll come to you next, that I think sometimes, going back to this idea of specialists versus non-specialists, that sometimes people can fall into the assumption that when we talk about research, we're only talking about that top level academic research, and actually research looks different for every network, and that there's research at every level across all different areas of activity within the network that is all valuable. Gail, can I come to you next?
Yeah, I was going to add something to what Justine was saying about collaborative doctoral partnership programs and the lack of funding that's available for the people that really deliver them. So from a museum perspective, there are lots of collaborative doctoral partnership programs. There's one in the Southwest. It's administered by 2 universities. We co-supervise those doctoral partnerships, but actually we get no financial benefit out of doing that. And that is something that I think as a consortium, we should be addressing with the academic world. We do talk to University Archaeology UK in terms of what we're doing. I think that question of impact comes into this as well, in the sense that there are lots of research projects which will approach organisations because they want to demonstrate impact. From a museum perspective, it's generally, we've written our project, we want to demonstrate impact, can we do an exhibition? And the answer is, that's not really going to achieve your impact. We have to tell you to go away. We want to do some engagement work. That's going to cost money. Write us into your projects from the beginning. And then also the receipt of the research as well. So there has been a piece of work that's been done by University Archaeology UK to look at how information from PhDs is passed back to organisations and benefits. So that kind of thing is going on. I mean, our research more recently as an organisation is clearly to do with understanding what is going on with specialisms, with space and with practice, and how we support those people who are non-specialists that have ended up in the same way as Paolo was talking about, the non-specialists who are now managing collections that they're not specialists within, and then being able to use that data. But that is funded externally. That's not coming from our membership subscription reserve base. We do need to have some seed money sometimes for some of those applications, and we do need to be able to be partnering with people that want to give us the information, because from a research perspective, there's only so many surveys that you can actually answer in any one particular given week. So being really strategic about what you're asking and when you're asking and how much work that takes. I showed you a screen in my presentation that was a survey that was undertaken in 2012, which was about space and expertise. And we had very low level full responses to that survey, because what people like me who were on the receiving end of it realised was it would take me weeks to answer the questions. And so if you're going to start doing research about your own organisation, audience wants, needs, etc., you have to be really savvy about what's the level of effort that's going to be required in order to be able to get this, which is why our next one, which is surveying the use of archaeological collections in museums, is a real-time survey. We're not expecting people to have collected stuff to go back and look at it. We're just asking them to give us a little information every week. It's not too onerous. And then build it up over that period of time, and we're going to get so much better response that way.
Thanks, Gail. Yes, I know what you mean. Survey fatigue is a real thing, and I think particularly once people realise that, particularly during the COVID period, when people realised there was an opportunity to step back and think about how they might structure some research, you could almost see there's an onslaught of surveys going out. So yeah, you need to be careful about how they're structured. Charlotte, can I come to you next?
Yeah, so in terms of what we do, so we obviously share lessons learned and findings from projects that we run through the network. So last year we did a project working with care homes during lockdown, and thinking about using our collections in new ways, etc. So we're able to share that research that we did and hopefully inspire people to do similar projects in the future. But fundamentally, our network is there to allow people to share their own research. So, you know, we very much welcome any of our members to deliver a presentation. We've had quite a lot of students come because they feel that, you know, whilst they're kind of, you know, got their head down in their PhD, it's actually nice to be able to share what they're doing with other people, to share it publicly, to develop awareness of different audiences and things like that. So actually, yeah, you do find that people love that opportunity to be able to reach people that they probably wouldn't have been able to without the network.
Lovely, thank you, Paolo.
Yeah, I absolutely 100% agree with all of that. It's you know, it's what really the SSNs, as far as I'm concerned, are, you know, it's one of the big things that they do is offer this network of opportunity to share what you've been finding out. You know, most of us will have either a JISC mail or a, you know, a blog or a journal or all of those things in order to be able to share the research which is taking place within our communities. It's essential. It's a really incredibly valuable tool, and it's, you know, it's one of those fundamental things which I think for a lot of networks, that's why they were set up in the first place, to be able to share this kind of level of information. So you know, it's what we're all about a lot of the time. Not always, but I think a lot of the time it's what we're about. I think it's really important.
It's a great way of engaging with your membership, isn't it, to offer that forum and that sort of space to share your information. So with a few minutes to go, oh, sorry, Paolo, you're going to say?
Also to collect that information, because when you have a network of people who look after these collections, it means effectively they are, I mean, we try not to be gatekeepers, but information is locked up in these collections and you can't get access to them unless you know they're there. So, you know, that's another really valuable way, you know, in which we make kind of research possible is to be able to share information about, well, if someone has a research question, to be able to share it with the group and be able to say, you know, who has these sorts of collections that we can access. And again, that's a really valuable thing that we do is to facilitate that interaction.
Yes, I suppose it's looking at the networks that they facilitate those connections between not only collections but those outside inquiries. They support and provide that forum for members to share their networks, and then they conduct and support their own research projects. So yes, with a few minutes to go, we've covered an awful lot of ground. So before I close the session, I thought I'd do a quick once around the screen and put all our panelists on the spot and just ask you just to sum up what you think sort of the benefits and potential benefits of being a member of an SSN and what the potential of SSNs are going forward. Gail, can I come to you first?
The potential of SSNs, I say it's the biggest single opportunity for continuing professional development outside of your own organisation, which costs next to nothing. And that, even if that is just you are volunteering or being part of a committee, we were discussing, you know, I've had to write sometimes a kind of a reason why somebody should be allowed the time to be on our committee to do any of that work. And if we actually worked out, you learn how to budget, you learn how to network, you're gaining information. It's all of that professional stuff that you do that you might not be able to do within your own workplace because you're constrained by your job. So I think apart from everything that we do as amazing organisations, the free continuing professional development and being able to find mentors in your own area of work and beyond is the single most important thing.
That was a brilliantly comprehensive answer. Who would like to go next? Charlotte, what would you say the potential of your network going forwards?
Yeah, I think just the potential just to grow in every sense, really, and to see things from different perspectives, because, you know, obviously I work in a museum, but then through the network I interact with creative practitioners who are looking at war and conflict from a completely different point of view, teachers, academics. You know, we all want to engage with the same subject, but it's really refreshing and really eye-opening to think, yeah, you can look at it from that point of view, and oh, you can use collections in this way. So yeah, that's what I love about it, is bringing all those different ideas together.
Lovely. Yes, a great way to get a 360-degree view of a topic. Erin, how about you?
I'd say just the strength in numbers is phenomenal. And I think the potential for cross-collection collaboration is really exciting. And I think that's where a lot of potential for APAC lives.
Lovely, thank you. Paolo?
I think just all of the above. Fundamentally, for me, it's all about the community that's there, and all of those things are, feeding into it. But fundamentally, it is a group of like-minded people, or at least people with shared interest, who you can talk to, and they know what the hell you're talking about. It's phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. They get it. They understand it. You learn new things from them. You teach them new things. It is just a wonderful experience being part of a network, and that is kind of extended out to the consortium, because other people who feel the same way, different topics, but same passion. It's a wonderful thing.
Great. And Justine, would you like to round it all up for us?
Yeah, all of those. And yeah, for me, it's also the fact that the network is being able to access new and different collections, and it's allowing that to happen in various different ways in loads of different areas across the UK, but also internationally as well, just because people are talking to each other and learning about what other collections are there and what exists that we wouldn't have known otherwise. And that's because the network is talking to each other and coming together either digitally or in person. And then in terms of the opportunities going forward, I think this sector as a whole has got a massive thing to learn from the SSN consortium and how the networks are coming together that isn't happening at the moment. We are still not seeing people at higher levels understanding that this consortium exists, and we need to do better at being able to advocate for that. But we also need to have people going, hang on a minute, there is like 50, I think it is, networks that now exist that are supporting so many different specialist collections across the sector. So many different organisations that are both museum and heritage based, but also far and wide, and collections and individuals that the museum sector are traditionally trying to access, that we are starting to do really, really well. And if we're really, really passionate and believe that we are about ensuring co-curation and ensuring that we're talking about stories that are diverse, then the subject specialist networks are central to that. And I don't think that's been recognised quite yet, but I think going forward as a whole, that's where the opportunity is.
Great. Well, that seems a really positive and potential full future point to end on. I would like to thank all of the panellists today, so Erin, Gail, Paolo, Charlotte and Justine. In addition, there is a companion piece to this webinar. We also have a podcast that's been recorded by our Sporting Heritage podcast lead, Russell, and that features Paul Evans from the Army Museum's Ogleby Trust, Sarah King from the Geological Curators Group, and Claire McDade from Industrial Museums Scotland. There'll be a link to that coming out to everybody who was signed up for this webinar, and we'll push it out through all the SSN networks. So thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.